In the dark years of World War II, when hatred consumed nations and millions vanished into the night, there was one small village that refused to surrender its humanity. High in the misty hills of southern France stood Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, an ordinary place with extraordinary courage. Here, simple farmers, teachers and children did what powerful leaders would not. They opened their doors and saved thousands from certain death. This is not a legend. This is the true story of the miracle of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, a forgotten act of quiet defiance where light triumphed over darkness. The wind that rolled across the Vivarais Plateau in the heart of southern France carried a strange stillness in the summer of 1940. The air smelled of pine, whetstone and uncertainty. The war that had shattered Europe had reached even the most isolated corners of the French countryside. Yet here, high in the mist-wrapped hills of the Haute-Loire region, life in the small Protestant village of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon moved at its own rhythm, slow, humble and devout. Farmers rose before dawn to tend their sheep and fields. Children in wool coats chased each other down narrow cobblestone lanes. Bells from the church tower tolled softly over the valley. From a distance, the place looked like a painting from another century, untouched, serene, timeless. But behind its calm facade, France was trembling. The German occupation had divided the nation. Northern France lay under direct Nazi control, while the south, the so-called free zone under the Vichy regime, lived in uneasy collaboration. Borders blurred, loyalties frayed, and fear seeped into everyday conversation. Trains passed through nearby towns carrying prisoners and refugees. Whispers of disappearances followed, and in Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, the villagers listened. They were not strangers to persecution. The people of this mountain village were Huguenots, descendants of French Protestants who had endured centuries of religious oppression. Their ancestors had hidden in caves, prayed in secret, and chosen conscience over survival. This history, etched into their identity, had prepared them for what was to come. At the centre of the village stood the temple, a simple stone church. It wasn't grand or gilded. Its pews were rough-hewn, its air cool and still, but its heart beat with quiet conviction. Every Sunday, villagers gathered there to hear the words of Pastor André Trocmé, a tall, lean man with sharp features, gentle eyes, and a calm voice that carried without shouting. When the war began, Trocmé's sermons changed. He spoke less about heaven and more about the duty of man on earth. He reminded his congregation that faith was not submission but resistance through love. The duty of Christians, he said, is to resist violence without violence. In 1940, those words sounded like rebellion. The Nazis demanded obedience. The Vichy government demanded silence. But in Le Chambon, Trocmé preached something far more dangerous, moral courage, and his people listened. Soon, refugees began to arrive. First one family, then another. Jews fleeing Paris, children sent by desperate parents, men and women whose names were erased by the state. They came by foot, by bicycle, by train. They arrived cold, hungry, terrified. Some carried forged papers, others carried nothing at all. The villagers did not ask questions, they simply opened their doors. In a world where denunciation was currency and compassion a crime, Le Chambon-sur-Lignon became a sanctuary. It began quietly, as all revolutions of conscience do. One evening in late autumn 1940, a storm swept across the plateau. The wind whistled through the pine forests and rattled the shutters of the stone houses. In the flicker of an oil lamp, Magda Trocmé, André's wife, heard a knock on their door. When she opened it, a woman stood there drenched to the bone, clutching the hand of a small boy. They were strangers, their clothes city-worn, their eyes hollowed by exhaustion. "We are Jews," the woman whispered. "Can you help us?" Magda did not hesitate. She led them inside, wrapped the boy in a wool blanket and set bread and soup on the table. Later, she would say she didn't think, she simply acted. At that time, she recalled, the word Jew had no meaning to me. They were just human beings in need. Word spread quietly through Le Chambon. Families began preparing spare beds, barns and basements. The school teacher, Daniel Trocmé, André's cousin, turned his small boarding school into a refuge. Children arrived with false identities and new names, but their fear could not be disguised. Daniel taught them arithmetic and grammar, but also how to hide at a moment's notice. Soon, the Trocmés' modest parsonage became a hub for what would grow into one of the most remarkable rescue operations in history. Without formal organisation or outside funding, the people of Le Chambon created a village-sized network of resistance built entirely on trust. The local doctor treated the sick quietly at night. Farmers shared food, though rations were scarce. The blacksmith forged new identity papers, mimicking the stamps of the Vichy police. Teenage couriers carried messages by bicycle through the forest, avoiding checkpoints. And when inspectors from the regime arrived, the villagers looked them in the eye and lied, calmly, fearlessly, collectively. One of them, a farmer named Jean Mathieu, later recalled, "We didn't decide to be heroes. We simply couldn't do otherwise. Each act of defiance was small, a meal, a forged document, a night's shelter, but together they became an invisible fortress of humanity." By 1942, the trickle of refugees had become a flood. Word of Le Chambon had spread through underground channels and church groups across France. Jews escaping roundups in cities like Lyon and Clermont-Ferrand found their way to the plateau, often after days of walking in rain and hunger. Many carried only photographs of loved ones lost in the chaos. The villagers welcomed them without hesitation. They gave them names, homes and work. Some refugees were integrated into the community so seamlessly that even other villagers didn't know who was who. Children played together in the meadows, their laughter echoing through the hills, a sound so ordinary it seemed miraculous. André and Magda knew what was at stake. The Gestapo had eyes everywhere. A single betrayal could destroy everything. Yet when officials visited the school demanding lists of foreigners, André refused. "I do not know what a Jew is," he said firmly. "I only know men." It was a dangerous answer, one that could have cost him his life. But it was also the truth. Under the cover of the plateau's dense forests, a secret route to Switzerland was established. Guides, often just local shepherds, led small groups of refugees by night through the mountains. Some never made it. Snow, exhaustion, or Nazi patrols claimed them, but many reached safety thanks to the courage of villagers who risked everything to lead them. To the people of Le Chambon, this was not rebellion, it was duty, a moral code older than any government. As winter deepened, the Germans tightened their grip on southern France. The Vichy police began hunting Jews even in the supposedly safe zone. Posters appeared in nearby towns, "Denounce the traitors." "Report those who hide Jews." Rewards were offered for information. Yet in Le Chambon, no one spoke. No one betrayed, not one. The snow thickened, muffling the world. Smoke from chimneys rose over the village in pale curls. Beneath that peaceful surface, hundreds of hidden lives breathed quietly, together, protected by a collective act of conscience. By the spring of 1943, the illusion of safety began to crumble. The war was changing. The German occupation had spread deeper into the south, and the Vichy regime grew more ruthless. Rumours of deportations, trains leaving for camps in the east, had reached even the most isolated villages. Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, once a hidden island of compassion, was no longer invisible. It began with whispers, reports that Gestapo officers were moving through the Haute-Loire region, checking records, questioning priests and mayors, and demanding lists of foreigners. When news reached Pastor André Trocmé, he gathered the elders of the Protestant community in the stone church at dusk. The wind moaned through the wooden rafters as he spoke quietly. "They will come. You know this. But we cannot change what we are. If we betray these people, we betray ourselves." No one spoke for a long moment, then one by one the heads nodded. They would not give in. A few weeks later, a telegram arrived from a friend in Lyon. "German patrols are coming toward your sector. They know about hidden refugees." That night, the village moved like a living organism. Doors opened silently. Children were woken and told to dress quickly. Blankets were packed, candles snuffed out, and families disappeared into the forest paths that only the locals knew. By dawn, the houses looked empty, quiet, almost abandoned. But beneath the stillness, the heart of resistance pulsed stronger than ever. Magda Trocmé moved from house to house, her calm voice reassuring those too frightened to flee. "They will not stay long," she said softly, "and they cannot see what God hides in mist and pine." When the Gestapo convoy arrived, black cars growling up the muddy road, the villagers met them with open faces and polite confusion. Soldiers questioned them, searched barns, lifted hay bales, tapped on cellar doors, but they found nothing. In the distance, from within the trees, hidden families listened to the boots crunching over gravel, praying that no infant would cry. The Germans left that evening frustrated, but everyone knew they would return, and they did. In February 1943, a group of German officers, led by the notorious Captain Ansel, came back with orders to break the village's silence. They arrested several local men suspected of harbouring Jews, among them the schoolteacher, Daniel Trocmé, André's cousin. Daniel was taken from his classroom without resistance. His students stood in stunned silence as he told them, "Do not be afraid. Do not hate." He was sent to a labour camp, and from there to Magda, where he was murdered later that year. His loss echoed like thunder through the community, proof that goodness could bleed and yet must endure. The arrest shook the village, but it did not stop the work. If anything, it deepened their resolve. That night, André Trocmé stood in his church before the congregation and said only, "We must continue to do what is right. If our courage falters, so will our souls." Through 1943 and into 1944, the raids intensified. Trucks came often, sometimes at dawn, sometimes in the middle of the night. Soldiers combed the hills, kicking open doors, interrogating villagers. Still, no one broke. The young men and women of Le Chambon had become masters of deception. When the Germans entered one end of the village, the locals sent coded signals, hanging a quilt from a window, lighting a lamp at the church steeple, to warn those on the other side. Hidden in caves, barns and mountain huts, hundreds of refugees waited out the danger in silence. A Jewish boy later remembered, "We were told not to breathe when the soldiers passed. I could hear their boots on the snow above us, but then I heard someone singing far away, a hymn from the church, and I knew we were safe." Even as the noose tightened, André refused to flee or hide. He told Magda, "If they take me, let them, but I will not give them a reason to take my soul." One afternoon, Captain Ansel himself confronted André at his doorstep. "You are hiding Jews," he said coldly. André looked at him calmly. "I do not hide anyone," he replied. "They are here under my roof, but I do not hide them." The Germans stared at him, uncertain whether to admire or despise the defiance. Finally, he turned and left, muttering, "Your God protects you, for now." By the summer of 1944, Le Chambon was surrounded by war. German convoys retreated through the region as Allied bombers roared overhead. The villages continued to harbour hundreds of Jews, children, widows, entire families, right until liberation. Despite arrests, interrogations and the death of their beloved teacher, not a single refugee was betrayed. Every soul hidden in Le Chambon survived. Later, one survivor would write, "It was not courage born of hatred for the enemy. It was love, pure and without question. The people of Le Chambon did not save us because we were Jews. They saved us because they saw no difference between us when the Allies finally liberated the region in late summer 1944. The villagers returned from hiding and reopened their homes. The forests that had concealed life became a place of reunion. Children stepped out of the shadows, blinking in the sunlight, alive, unbroken and free. The war ended for Le Chambon as quietly as it had begun. No trumpets, no parades, only the distant crack of retreating guns, the rumble of Allied convoys far down the valley, and the sudden strange silence that followed. One morning in August 1944, a farmer climbed the ridge above the village and saw the German trucks pulling away, snaking down the mountain road like black beetles vanishing into fog. By midday, a boy ran through the streets shouting, "Ils sont partis!" They're gone. Doors opened, windows swung wide. After years of whispers and curfews, laughter returned to Le Chambon-sur-Lignon. From the forest, the refugees emerged like ghosts returning to life. Children crept out first, pale, thin, clutching hands they'd held through long nights underground. Behind them came their mothers, the elderly, the sick, people who had lived months in barns, attics and caves, fed by the courage of strangers. The villagers met them with tears, bread and open arms. No questions, no ceremony, only the simple joy of breath and sunlight. Magda Trocmé stood outside her stone house, her apron dusted with flour, when the first of the Jewish children she had hidden came running up the path. He was taller now, older than his years, but his eyes still carried the haunted look of fear. He hesitated, then whispered, "Is it really over?" Magda smiled softly. Yes, my child. You can go home now, if home still exists. Not everyone returned. Some families never found their parents again. Some fathers had died in camps whose names still meant nothing then. Auschwitz, Sobibor, Majdanek, and Daniel Trocmé, the schoolteacher taken away in 1943, was among them. His students left flowers on his empty desk. On the chalkboard, someone wrote, "He taught us to be brave." The grief hung over the village like morning fog. Yet in that grief, there was pride. The unspoken understanding that their small mountain community had done what entire nations had failed to do. Weeks after liberation, Pastor André Trocmé received a letter from Switzerland. It was from Ruth Levy, a Jewish woman he had hidden years before. She wrote, "I am alive because your people saw me as human when others saw me as nothing. I do not know how to thank you, perhaps only to promise that I too will never close my door to someone in need." André read the letter aloud to his congregation. No one spoke, no one applauded. They simply bowed their heads, not in pride but in humility. In the decades that followed, Le Chambon returned to quiet life. The children who had hidden in cellars grew up, married, built homes of their own. André and Magda continued their ministry until old age, refusing to see themselves as heroes. When asked how they found the courage, André would answer, "Courage. We only did what had to be done." For years, little was said of what had happened. The villagers did not speak of their deeds. They saw them as ordinary, as natural as breathing, but the world had not forgotten. In 1971, representatives from Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust memorial, travelled to the mountains of France to honour Le Chambon-sur-Lignon. It was the first time an entire community, not just individuals, was recognised as righteous among the nation, standing in the same church where decades earlier he had urged his people to shelter the hunted. The elderly Pastor Trocmé accepted the medal on behalf of them all. He said simply, "If we had to start over, we would do the same thing again." Today, a small museum in the village keeps their memory alive. Old photographs show faces of children saved, yellowed letters of thanks, ration cards, forged papers, and a Bible marked with verses about love and refuge. Outside the museum, a plaque reads, "In this village, men and women of faith refused to stand by while their neighbours were persecuted. Their light shone in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it." Every year, descendants of those rescued return to Le Chambon. They bring their children, their grandchildren, and stand beneath the same chestnut trees that once hid them. They speak softly as if afraid to disturb the spirits of the past. One elderly survivor once said during a visit, "When the world went mad, this village stayed sane." The locals smiled politely, still uncomfortable with praise. "We are not heroes," one said. "We are just people who remembered what it means to be human." When André Trocmé passed away in 1971 and Magda in 1996, the village bells tolled for them both. But even after their deaths, the spirit they nurtured remained in every stone wall, every narrow lane, every child's laughter echoing through the hills. The miracle of Le Chambon was never about grand gestures. It was about hundreds of small acts, doors left unlocked, bread shared in silence, eyes that refused to look away. And that is how they changed the world, not with power, not with weapons, but with ordinary goodness that refused to die. When the world fell into madness, one village remembered what it meant to be human. They asked for no glory, no recognition, only the chance to do what was right. Le Chambon-sur-Lignon was a miracle, not because they were fearless, but because they acted despite their fear. History remembers battles and empires, but sometimes the greatest victory is found in the quiet courage of ordinary hearts. If this story moved you, share it. Let the light of Le Chambon shine again. And join us next time as we uncover another hidden moment in history.